Yeah, I got that.
The Housing, Community, and Economic Development Committee will now come to order. First, I'll announce that item number 3 will be continued and held in committee. Next, we'll have staff read item 1 into the record.
Item 1 is a motion, Zine Wesson, relative to an instruction to the CLA to evaluate the approved project, the Village at Westfield, Topanga, for possible forms of economic development incentives for the project, and a request to the developer Westfield to provide full cost reimbursements for financial economic analysis and any other reviews associated with the economic evaluation of this project.
Thank you. Is there anybody here to speak on item number 1? Any public comment cards on item number 1? Seeing no public comment cards on item number 1, public comment on item number 1 is now closed. I do not have any questions on this matter. Therefore, it'll be a recommendation of the chair that we move to approve the motion.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair. I believe there might be an amendment to the motion. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. They approve the motion and add an amendment. The CLA requests approval of an amendment to be authorized to accept up to $200,000 from the developer to hire a consultant to conduct the necessary financial analysis. Is that the amendment we're talking about? Thank you very much. You're just one step ahead of me. Okay. All right. So that'll be the recommendation of the chair. Okay. Can you please read item 2 into the record?
Item number 2 was continued from November 2nd, 2011. It is a CRA report relative to authorization to invest $2.5 million of state energy program grant funds in support of bonds to be issued to finance energy improvement projects.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody here to speak on item number 2? Okay. Seeing no public comment cards filled out on item number 2, nobody coming forward. Public comment on item number 2 is now closed. Therefore, without further ado, it'll be the recommendation of the chair to receive and file this item. Okay. We next go to item number 4.
Item number 4 is a CDD report and CAO2 report relative to approval of the results of the Domestic Violence Shelter Operators Program, RFP, and authority to execute contracts with each of the 10 proposers selected to become service providers for the period commencing April 1st, 2012 through March 31st, 2013, with an option to extend for up to 2 additional one-year periods.
Okay. Thank you. We do have public comment cards on this item. We'll go to public comments first. I'll read them off in the order that they are before me. We have Ben Shermer, Pat Butler. Can you please come up as I call your name? Debbie Nelson, and Toby Quintiliani. You know how to read that? Okay. We'll start to my right. Go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Ben Shermer. I'm Executive Director for Rainbow Services. I'm here to support the DVSO funding as it's been proposed to the committee. We've been working on this for a long time, and it would be very unsettling and very disruptive to the shelter operations if this RFP was thrown out again. It was thrown out last year, and that created a lot of chaos for a lot of agencies. So I'm just asking that you please support the proposal that's being submitted by CDD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Pat Butler. I'm the Director of Sojourn Services for Battered Women and Their Children, another one of the shelter-based comprehensive service providers. I agree with Ben Shermer. We have already done this proposal the last time. It seems like every time we do this proposal, we lose money, so I'm willing to just settle with what we have right now, and I really don't want to write this again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Toby Quintiliani, Senior Director of 1736 Family Crisis Center, and I'm here to speak to you about what we consider is a serious logic and process problem in the CDD funding methodology. I want to bring your attention to the important fact that the original intention of this DVSO initiative 17 years ago was to fund high-performing domestic violence shelters so that lives could be saved by those agencies who work hand-in-hand with the LAPD, protecting innocent women and children who are on the verge of dying at the hands of their abusers. CDD's funding recommendations would create massive problems in the domestic violence field by risking closure or severe program reductions to some very high-performing shelters such as 1736, that are the pillars of the work done in the DV field and have been doing so for 17 years as DVSO grantees. The fiscal and community impact of the suggested distribution of the DVSO funds is dangerous and too severe. CDD erroneously contends that an equitable funding formula can be based strictly or predominantly on bed count. This is mathematically and conceptually incorrect. Just as it is logical to understand that a hospital emergency room could not compare for budget planning purposes to those of the long-term respite care, it is also logical and easy to understand that an emergency bed for domestic violence victims and their children could not be compared to apartment-style setting for longer care. In the DVSO RFP, funding was contingent strictly on bed count, with funding jumps made by bed count categories. So it's illogical to say that a 21-bed shelter is substantially more expensive to run than a 20-bed shelter, which is what CDD's funding formula implied. In fact, as DVSO fund recipients for the last 17 years, we are well aware that clients brought to us in the middle of the night who had been on the verge of being murdered require constant attention, supervision, and very expensive interventions. Examples of some of these are immediate crisis counseling, suicide assessment, immediate food and clothing. In fact, professional staff don't take their eyes off of these very high-risk victims.
Hi, I'm Debbie Nelson. I'm also a senior director at 1736. We also want to say that when we're dealing with our high-risk victims, the very next day they need immediately need case management to access uninterrupted education services for their children, emergency medical attention, legal services, job development, and or help with educational pursuits. Conversely, survivors in apartment-style settings a year or so later may not need such consistent, expensive treatment. CDD's new bed count-only system of allocating DVSO funds is unprecedented for domestic violence shelters and analytically shallow. We're here to offer a solution. 14 shelters applied for DVSO funds, all of which were previously funded by DVSO. 12 received passing scores. 1736 operates 2 of the 12 shelters with high passing proposal scores. We recommend that the passing agencies be funded minimally at their same funding levels as they received in the 2011-12 year. This is the process that Council has supported for 17 years in its funding decisions that created this important network of citywide DV shelters. However, this proposal process implies that Council has erred for 17 years by now capriciously disrupting and threatening to collapse the very system that is skillfully saving victims and children whose lives are imminently threatened. The result of adopting this recommendation to fund all 12 shelters with passing scores at the same time continuing dollar amounts that they have been operating at the same continuing dollar amounts is that all 12 shelters will stay open, with thanks to DVSO support continuing. The DVSO initiative will be doing what it's supposed to do by its own definition, keeping well-functioning shelters open and not shutting them down after 17 years of creating our city's powerful DV shelter network to care around the clock for most vulnerable victims. Although all 12 shelters will take moderate funding cuts from other government sources, none of these 12 will have the catastrophic effects caused by DVSO cuts. The LAPD will continue to have the support of domestic violence shelters providing free emergency response services.
Thank you. Next, we have Rabea Sen, Deborah Sue, and Mariah Baver. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rabea Sen. I'm the program director with the Domestic Violence Programs for Prototypes. We have our domestic violence transitional shelter, Star House, and we thank you for considering this. We do support this proposal. It actually helps us keep our doors open. With the RFP that was thrown out last year, and the budget cuts in general that happened, our programs were severely strained. We have not been able to operate at our full bed capacity, and we have had to downsize, in terms of the staff. We still keep our services going, but everything is just getting more and more tight. With the funding recommendations this year, we will be able to operate at full bed capacity. We'll be able to provide much more in terms of staff for our clients, and therefore the quality of our services, which are good, will be even better at this point. We provide wraparound services, case management, therapy, counseling. We have a legal program. We have all of that. So we do support this, and we hope that you support it as well, and help us as part of the entire shelter system keep our doors open, operate at full bed capacity, and not have to go through this painful RFP process for a third year in a row that causes strain that is felt beyond just those of us who sit down to write the RFP. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Song. I'm from the Center for the Pacific Asian Family, another domestic violence shelter agency represented. This is the fourth one you're hearing in supporting the proposal by CDD. Part of it is we understand that it may negatively impact a particular agency, but you have to look at the whole system, the 12 agencies that are represented in the city. And the disturbance the process poses on all of us. And even Ben Sherma, who is losing some of their funding, is saying that he is supporting the process because we want to move forward. We want to have some level of planning, some level of consistency, and really trust the process will be supported by the City Council. In terms of whether the quality of services are going to be impacted, all of us are mandated by state standards to provide all 13 services. So I don't think any of the shelters are providing less than what is required by the state. And the 13 requirements require that all of us have 24-hour staffing, provide a level of service that does have a minimum requirement for regardless of bed size. So that is the minimum threshold that the bed count has established. CPAF will also be losing bed count, and we are providing a unique service for Asian and Pacific Islanders who otherwise would not be served even by 1736. So we are, all of us together are providing a network of services for the city, and we are providing all of us are providing critical services that are saving lives. So we ask that you take all of us into account.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mariah Bauer. Honorable committee members, thank you for considering this funding recommendation for the DVSO programs. I'm from Prototype Starhouse, and we support this funding recommendation. Starhouse operates as a domestic violence transitional shelter, and over the last year, we have served close to 90 women and children, and this continued funding will help to keep our doors open and provide safe shelter to families escaping domestic violence.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes the public comment on item number 4. Public comment on item number 4 is now closed. Could I have the staff from CDD come forward? My first question to you is, how many times do you think we can go back out to RFP before everybody's satisfied?
I'm Julia O'Leary with the planning section in CDD. I would think many, many times.
What's that?
Many, many times.
Many, many times, perhaps an infinite number of times. Yes. And if we keep going out to RFP, would some of the existing providers that we so desperately need in this community, could they actually fold up their operations without these kinds of funds? My point is, time for a lot of these organizations that appear to be not-for-profit organizations, time is not on their side. Whatever monies, whether it's $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year, or what have you, for an organization providing this service, for them to have delays in being able to get access to these funds, does that potentially put them in a position where not only do they reduce their bed count, that they may actually go away?
Yes, sir. Renee Jones. I'm the program manager for the DVSO program. Time is of the essence. Our previous contract year ended on March 31st, and there are some shelters that are threatening, on the verge of closing their doors as it relates to this funding.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add after hearing the testimony from the providers of services today?
I feel that the RFP was fair and concise.
Now, let me help you out here. Do you think it was fair based on the amount of resources,
Based on
the unfortunate amount of resources that we have, and the fact that we do have a network of services that spans across 4 million people in this city?
Yes, sir.
So, based on that context,
Yes, sir.
it was as fair as you possibly could make it as far as your abilities?
Yes, sir. With our pending cuts and our cuts year after year, I think it's fair as it was presented.
Is it plentiful, the amount of money?
No.
No, please be honest. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Is it understood or implied or expected that organizations providing these services, that the funds that are within this RFP have to be supplemented somehow, some way with other funds for them to realistically give the services and the levels that they'd like to give?
Yes.
Okay. So this is unfortunately kind of like what I look at what Social Security is to Americans who retire. Can't live on $600 a month. Just can't. It's actually a supplement, or to be supplemented. It's not something that is going to satisfy the responsibilities of a human being to be able to provide everything that they need to get along.
And we encourage all of our agencies not to solely depend on the city funding, to seek other funding, state, federal, grants, foundations, as a support, as a leverage to our funding sources.
So unfortunately, you're not in the position to judge these organizations, but you're only in a position to be able to try to, as fairly as possible, provide this opportunity of access to funds to those organizations who are involved in the RFP, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We are now at a quorum. We have Councilmember Alarcon and Councilmember Perry present. So from this moment forward, we'll operate as a quorum. We are on item number 4. We already heard public comment. And any more questions from the committee members?
Just relative to the service areas, I noticed out of the 2.3 million, there's only about 420,000 that goes to the San Fernando Valley. Is there any way to correct that? I mean, is there less domestic violence in the San Fernando Valley?
No, sir. This is a citywide program, and as the program is constructed, when you have a domestic violence victim, you try to get them out of the area.
No, believe me, I understand that,
But there are currently...
but they're just not going to go from the San Fernando Valley to other parts.
And they do. They do. You want to keep them out of the area of where the abuse occurred.
No, I understand that, but the San Fernando Valley has 1.6 million people. It's as big as more than, I think it would be the 5th largest city in the United States. So it's big enough that we can handle people in the San Fernando Valley. And if you looked at other similar-sized jurisdictions, they run the same kind of operation.
Yes.
And they move the people around. I have no problem with that. But I'm questioning why such a small fraction of the services is in the San Fernando Valley with 1.6 million people.
That's the only shelters that applied for this particular RFP. There is one shelter in the San Fernando Valley that is both of emergency and transitional.
Oh, okay. One emergency shelter, and the others are just service providers?
We have emergency shelter and a transitional shelter in the San Fernando Valley.
And how does that compare to the other parts of Los Angeles?
Very small, but it's all based on the availability of the shelters. There are no other shelters that I know of in the San Fernando Valley that we funded everybody that applied for the RFP. No other domestic violence shelter providers applied that have a shelter in the San Fernando Valley.
Do we have any strategic plans to develop that?
Does the city develop shelters?
No.
We respond
Well,
to service providers.
I'm not
for
saying that, to develop the services. I mean, if we have a gap, it seems to me that,
There are other drop-in centers in the San Fernando Valley, but since our funds are so small and dwindling every year, we only provide funding to those shelter-based agencies. But there are other drop-in centers and other homeless shelters, but we just exclusively dedicate these funds for just domestic violence shelter operations. But there are other drop-in centers and support services in the San Fernando Valley.
the Chicano Service Action Center has a San Fernando Valley presence, right?
No. Not to my knowledge, not for the proposals that they
I just say that
submitted.
because I used to work there.
Yeah. But not for the proposals that they submitted for this RFP.
But isn't that an agency that might be open to developing services out there?
There could be. I can't speak for Chicana.
Well, there's a whole bunch of people waving their hands over there. I'm assuming they're saying yes,
Okay.
but it just,
They didn't apply for any shelter funding in the San Fernando Valley with this RFP.
Mr. Chair, this affects your district and my district in
Yeah,
particular, and the Chicano Service Action Agency is in your district on Victory Boulevard, and it just seems to me that if there was an effort to develop services to improve on this disparity, that there are at least a couple of agencies out there that would be willing to develop such programs. But there's a huge disparity in services. 7th Council District has none. And even though they may be served, it's highly unlikely that a domestic violence victim is going to be traipsing across town on a regular basis. They just don't do that. Some of them do, but most of them don't. They go to their neighborhoods.
And the supportive services are in the neighborhood.
Where?
Do many of these victims get referred to the shelter?
Yes.
From other organizations?
Yes.
So basically what you're saying is there is a network in the San Fernando Valley. However, when it comes to the actual shelter, the shelter physically being funded by this RFP, there's one in the valley that's being funded.
Correct.
If there are others, they did not apply. And if somebody's a victim, very likely they'll go to something, for example, as a drop-in center, or the police department would refer them, et cetera, and they will be taken to or brought to a shelter.
Correct.
No, I understand that. But there are many victims that will not go to outside locations. And I recognize, I mean, if you go to any one of these shelters, you'll find that most of the women in the shelters do not live in those areas. I just think that it discourages people from coming forward when they don't have a visible shelter, not a visible shelter, but a shelter that is known to the service providing community. It diminishes their referrals.
Well, we're caught in a catch-22, aren't we? Where if we were to go out, say to the organization in the Valley, council member was talking about Chicana Center, and your department were to give them a call and say, hey, we encourage you to get involved in domestic violence shelter operations. Well, the next thing they're going to assume is you have some money to give to them.
Exactly.
And, for example, startup costs, et cetera, I'm sure are much more than the ongoing costs, although it's both very expensive. So we're caught in a catch-22. If we're going to proactively encourage organizations to create a service that they currently probably could do, but currently are not, one of the main reasons why they're probably not doing that isn't because they don't want to, it's because they don't see the path to being able to garner the funds to provide that service at the level that it should be provided.
Correct.
And the funding did take an 11% cut compared to last year's consolidated plan funding.
And the previous year, and the previous year, and the previous year. So we're dealing with less and less money, because once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is federal funds. And if you haven't noticed, when you look at the proposals from the Republicans in the lower house who control that house, they look at 40%, 60% cuts, and in some categories, actually elimination, completely of those funds coming from Washington. So we're dealing very precariously with an 11% cut, which could have easily been 22%, 33%, 40%, had the other house not fought to get this compromised amount. I'm not saying we should be happy with it, but the bottom line is that's the hand we've been dealt. And again, council members, this went out to RFP more than once, and with the public comment that took place earlier, 9 out of 10 of the public comments were that this is funding that they desperately need. Yes, it's not perfect, but they really need it badly, and to move forward with this money now is better than to go back out to RFP and try to re-engineer how we can do that. Yeah, but, I mean, I'm just
I'm not
trying to help,
suggesting that.
but you weren't here when the other...
No, I understand that. I do want to recognize that while these are primarily based on emergency and transitional shelters, the services that are provided go far beyond that.
Yes, sir.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a shelter in the area. It has to be an entity that provides services that enhance the service provision in the system. That's what I'm talking about. That there's far too little effort to have organizations that are doing a multiplicity of services that are related to focus in on this without necessarily providing shelter services. For example, comprehensive case management, group and family counseling, school arrangements, stuff like that. All that stuff could be provided.
And sir, we used to set aside 10% of this funding specifically for supportive services, as you stated. But with our cuts every year, we had to make an adjustment.
Okay, I would like to ask for an amendment that the department work with the council district to develop a plan to fill the gaps in the East San Fernando Valley.
Okay. So based a report back on the network throughout the city, specifically looking at the San Fernando Valley, and also a breakdown of what services are per council district.
Haven Hills does a good job in the West San Fernando Valley. Jewish Family Services is in the center of the San Fernando Valley, but there's hardly anything in the East San Fernando Valley.
Well, we used to have WAVE at one time, right?
WAVE,
Yeah.
Harbor Community, actually. But there are service providers that do counseling services out there at a minimum, and I'm just saying that I think the department should work with the council office. And frankly, if we're talking about $200,000, I'd have offered that a long time ago if anybody asked me. But I'm not getting that kind of push from the department, and nobody's ever informed me.
Give us the information, push us to find some money so we can help these organizations. How's that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, public comment on item number 4 had been closed. That ends the discussion by the committee. So with that, we'll move to approve the CAO's report on this item. Okay. That item's approved. Thank you. We now move to item number 5.
Item number 5, motion and city attorney to report relative to the role of the city attorney as legal representative for both the city and the designated local agency, and how the city attorney manages any potential conflicts of interest and the need for possible client waivers. This item is in council this morning.
Okay. This item was actually requested by Councilmember Reyes that we, on a previous note, it was asked of the Councilmember Reyes that we waive it from committee. Councilmember Reyes normally would be here. He's not here today. So what I would recommend is that we open up public comment on this item, and then if the committee wishes, we would move it to the council, communicate with Councilmember Reyes to make sure that he's present on the day that we actually hear the item on the council floor, and then we can then deliberate on the item on the floor as well. At this time, I'd like to open up public comment on item number 5. Do we have any public comment cards on item number 5? I do not see any public comment cards before me. That will now close public comment on item number 5. So with that, any questions from the committee? No? Okay. And once again, we can and will have discussion on the council floor on this item as well. I don't want to, I do have some questions, but I'll wait till we get to the floor when Mr. Reyes is present. We can have a full discussion on this. Okay, so with that, we'll move this item out of committee, and then we'll let the President's office know that Reyes is requesting that we not hear it today. We'll move it to today's council, and then we'll discuss with the Councilman Reyes' office as to when he'd like to move it to. Okay, all right, thank you. Next is item number 6.
Item number 6 is continued from April 18th. It's a CAO and CLA report relative to establishing an economic development department.
Okay. Okay, we have public comment cards on this. We only have one public comment card. So we'll bring Brady Westwater forward, public comment on item number 6. You sit here to my right.
Good morning, council members.
Morning.
My name is Brady Westwater. I'm one of the founders, former president of Downtown Neighborhood Council and of the citywide Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. I'm here today strictly as a private citizen. In the past 15 years, I have brought over 150 creative individuals and businesses to historic downtown Los Angeles and other parts of downtown pro bono. And while I'm encouraged to see that the council is taking this up, I'm worried about the methodology. The problem has been too often what has come out of City Hall to create jobs and businesses has been detriment to the community. It's actually driven away businesses. It's actually hurt other existing businesses because people running these programs are not connected to the community. We've only had 2 really successful programs downtown. The first is Gallery Row, championed by Jan Perry. It was a community-run, community-organized event that was sponsored by the council office and helped with very few funds, that has done more to change the face of downtown than anything since adaptive reuse. That then gave birth to Art Walk. Now we have Councilman Huizar following in their footsteps and bringing back Broadway. Again, a volunteer, community-driven effort. The problem of having consultants putting together projects like this, you have people who have never created a job, have no idea what a tech industry is doing in this community, and no idea what the creative communities are doing. If they are the ones making the decisions on how this is going to be crafted and who's going to be staffing this, when there's the end result of having the same types of commissions, the same types of committees out of City Hall we've had in the past. So I don't know what the solution is, but there needs to be some way that people who actually create businesses and create jobs are part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brady is, Mr. Westwater is the only one that filled out a public comment card on number 6. Anybody else here to make public comment on number 6? Seeing no one come forward, public comment on item number 6 is now closed. Can we have the staff come forward, please? One of the moving parts on this this particular effort would be what kind of funds we could utilize for this. Can you remind us what kind of funds are or are not in flux at this time based on what the state is still yet to determine?
Certainly. Well, I think you're referring to the dissolution of the CRA and the distribution of the tax, property taxes, or tax increment. At this point, there's an estimate in the budget, mayor's budget, of a total of $48 million, $30 million of which is for is money on hand, and that was based on the money that was set aside to comply with AB 27, which was of course found unconstitutional. Excuse me. Now, since that time, the DLA has began putting some of that money aside for reserves and for outstanding obligations, many of which we've discussed. So the total estimate on what should be coming from the city at some point was in the $55 million range. There's a lot of uncertainty on the amount and timing, so there's 30 in the budget. Now, there's additional $18 million going forward between 18 and 20. That every year when the property taxes are paid, now that the money is not being diverted to the CRA, that money will be divided between the city, the county, and the school districts.
18 million cut up, or our portion is 18 million?
Our portion would be 18 million.
Got it.
Right.
It's important to point out that, we had this challenge in the context of the budget, that the decisions on ultimately what the city's share will be are being discussed at the Oversight Committee that was just recently formed. In fact, it's having their first meeting today, and ultimately blessed by the Department of Finance. So there's a lot of this is still a moving target, and at least what was contemplated in the budget was a reasonable estimate. We really won't know for some time ultimately what the city's portion will be, and we've been informed by the county auditor controller that we won't receive any actual funds until January, so there's going to be a long period of time. Beyond that, the budget also includes $2.5 million of seed money to help fund economic development structure for the nonprofit as laid out in our report.
Okay. Thank you. I do have some questions and comments. Ms. Perry?
Oh, okay, thank you. So, to either one of you, I realize the CAO-CLA report is recommending the formation of a new economic development department in conjunction with an economic development nonprofit organization. But the first question I have is it entirely necessary to form a new department? And would it be possible to house the oversight of a new economic development department with an existing department like the CLA or the CAO? And could this be a more cost-effective and quicker way to do this?
Well, let me start, and then, of course, Miguel, if you want to add anything. We are calling it a new department, although it's important to note that there are a lot of economic development functions that are in place now. Now, whether rather than a new department, it's the community development department, and things are centralized there, whether we rename it. The idea is really to accomplish what has been attempted since the Bradley administration, which is to try and consolidate and be more effective in our economic development outreach. So again, it's creating a new department, folding it into an existing department, but there are still a number of functions that the city is going to have to do, continue to do, irrespective of the nonprofit. The federal funds are still flowing through the city, so we're still going to have underwriting and financial analysis capabilities so that we can report to the mayor and council. The block grant money coming through, still ultimately the city is responsible for. The Workforce and Investment Board job training issues, all of those contract administration issues, those are going to continue to have to be done. Those are done now, so it's really a matter of attempting to centralize that. In terms of the nonprofit itself, our concept is that would be an entity with really one sole purpose, which is to create jobs, and then to work with those other entities in the funding sources on how to attract business, how to incentivize business, et cetera. Now, in terms of where that nonprofit is housed, again, we at this point are asking for authority to move forward on the concept and try to flesh out all of these issues. There's no final determination made. It could be housed anywhere that the council would want it to be housed. Ultimately, I think our concept would be on a long-term permanent basis, that it be within one structure so that the nonprofit is working really directly on a day-to-day basis within that department.
If I could just add that, I think Jerry summarized it well. The concept behind what we laid out was to really emphasize there's two pieces to economic development. It doesn't, because we're going to create a recommended nonprofit, it doesn't mean we're getting out of the economic development business as a city. That's still an important function. And so it was really to emphasize that point. There's still work that needs to be done on our end to either coordinate or to consolidate or to streamline economic development activities on the city side that will not be done by the nonprofit. So that conversation still needs to be had. Creating a nonprofit alone is only half of the equation.
But we could create a nonprofit and then house oversight in an existing department.
That is an option that you could have.
You could.
Yeah, and that might be more cost effective. I would like it very much if, as you go through your analysis, and if you need me to do this, I can put it in a motion, that we understand how much it costs to develop a new economic entity, the nonprofit portion. And obviously, I think down the road, we would be releasing an RFP to see what we get back. There's also a wide range of how much the city would receive this fiscal year due to the dissolution of the redevelopment agency. I don't know if either of you even knows yet whether we'll have a final figure to work with yet.
We've discussed it briefly. It is a bit of a moving target. The budget contemplates $48 million, of which 30 of it is one time and 18 of it is ongoing. The final decision of what that ends up looking like is really in the hands of the Oversight Committee and the Department of Finance, and we probably won't receive any real resolution of that until the next fiscal year. And so to the extent that projects get added or subtracted, or the reserves that the DLA has proposed, that obviously impacts ultimately what we receive. So the budget attempted to try to be reasonable in estimating it, but it's something we're going to have to watch carefully, and either it could be additional dollars in the mid-year, or it could be less dollars that we're going to have to confront.
So as we move forward in the formation of this idea, and how we set up the structure, I'd also like you to consider the issue of multi-year funding. Now, I recognize the mayor's proposed budget has $2.5 million in it, but I to start out, but I think that we need to look at a multi-year commitment to the new economic development entity. And at this point, I'm a proponent of formation of nonprofit and then absorption within an existing department and not forming a new department. So just so you understand where I'm coming from, because I don't want to, increase our load. But what I'm also interested in, and this is a side issue, but it's an interesting one that will evolve from the convention center stadium discussion. Obviously, we can have greater control of our own destiny by the types of conventions and shows and things that we book at the convention center, and as we move forward in creating that joint entity of how we manage that campus for the future, I want to make sure that we add the booking functions of the Los Angeles Convention Center to the list of items that a new economic development entity would handle. Your report also recommends that asset management RFPs you amended the asset management RFPs. I'd like to have that go to ITGS at some point so we can discuss that to make sure that the final consultant report is considered in ITGS. That's it.
If I could address...
Could you please clarify, Councilmember Perry, as far as the convention center bookings, that the organization be aware of all of that activity, or that they be in charge of that activity?
No, I think they need to be, we're probably, as the stadium and the convention center, the new convention center move forward, there's discussion about creating a stakeholder group for the entire campus. And so what I'm looking at is folding that activity, that stakeholder group, into this larger economic development entity, so that much like, probably like a joint powers authority or some kind of authority where stakeholders who drive business to the city of Los Angeles have a seat at the table, not to do the scheduling. This group will be focusing on strategic scheduling for the entire campus, the stadium, the convention center, and every other space over there. But what I'm talking about is taking a representative from that group, maybe the head or the ED or whatever, I'm not sure yet, but making sure that that is considered as an important stakeholder as part of our development of this economic development entity, which I hope is a nonprofit with a companion piece absorbed into.
Basically, they have representation
right.
on that.
A seat at the table.
Most convention centers have sort of a separate entity that manage and reconcile the conflict between trade shows and citywide conventions. And so it's an authority in some cases that on a daily basis are constantly trying to resolve that issue and bring as many people to the city as possible. And so we're actually preparing a report to look at that current conflict and find resolutions to it. I think what Councilwoman Perry is saying is that in relation to that, obviously it's tied to a larger economic development strategy for the city, and so there should be a relationship between the two that's formalized, because that tourism is one of the major economic drivers in Los Angeles, and to the extent that there's coordination there. So we could certainly address that. In relation to an ongoing source of funding, you know, what our report proposes as an option is that, you know, clearly we've been forced to consider using the new tax increment to deal with our fiscal crisis. But that could certainly be looked at the base, and any additional revenue beyond that is obviously an annual budgetary decision that your council would make. And a portion, if not all of it, could be dedicated to as a source of funding for economic development as we move forward in future years.
Councilmember Alarcon.
How is the establishment of a nonprofit different than the relationships that we've established with economic development nonprofits in the city's history? So Valley Economic Development, FAME, PACE, all these organizations that do economic development activities historically, and particularly you would remember the efforts of Mayor Reardon in the aftermath or during the rebuild efforts, where we established these community
RLA.
development. RLA was the organizing group, but the entities that were pre-existing were funded to do community banking, et cetera, et cetera. How would this model be different from those activities? That's my first question. The second question has to do with the reliance on CRA. Obviously, one of the reasons we're moving forward with this is because we're losing CRA, and yet most of the projects that you point to in terms of city successes were absolutely reliant on CRA, either for land acquisition, environmental cleanup, or first in cash opportunities. So without CRA being in place, I'm not understanding what the benefit of creating this new structure is to handle those functions. So I have those two. Those are two of my bigger questions. I see them more as challenges than I'm not trying to create opposition. I'm just saying that I don't see the distinct difference between what we did in the 90s and what is being proposed here. But I also see that on top of that, we don't have the CRA to rely on anymore, and all the instruments that the CRA provides in terms of land acquisition and first in money.
Sure. Well, I'll start with those. Actually, both questions are really interrelated. In terms of the difference in the 90s, I think what the concept is, it's really expanding that concept to have an entity in place that the business community is vested in, to really create economic development strategy for the city and strategies to attract business. Many of the organizations you refer to today are very important business advocacy entities, but the concept is that the nonprofit would contract with the city to deliver very specific deliverables and performance, and if they're not performing, then the city could cancel that contract. The funding, again, could come from the tax increment flowing from the CRA. As we discussed in the report, I think a very important and interesting aspect of this would be to also handle asset management through this entity, as they do in New York, The entity could use the fees generated through asset management, which we don't do well now. And I'm not talking about housing city employees. That would stay with general services. I'm talking about being able to use the assets we have out there to create economic development opportunities, business sightings, so those fees could also fund the operations of this nonprofit entity. So the concept would be that they would decide not just where do we compete today, but where should we compete? How do we get the money, and not just city money, venture capital money? How do we get money together and connect the money with people who want to build business in the city? So it's really the council and the mayor would develop the overall economic development strategy. You would make those decisions and then contract with this nonprofit entity to actually deliver on those concepts. Now, in terms of the CRA, I think we wanted to make the point that the city has worked very hard to do economic development. We have been successful in certain areas, very successful. Largely, again, with the exception of the efforts in the 90s, it's really been sort of in response to projects that have come to us. There isn't really a strategic plan to go out and get and develop those projects. So, again, it's not that we're relying on the CRA. We're recognizing the CRA is no longer there. They did play a vital role. We're going to have to figure out how to do the kinds of projects the CRA did as well, but go well beyond that in terms of the strategy.
So you don't know either. I was trying to grasp specifically what we're going to do out of what you said, and it was very vague, and that's my concern. That we can have a vague discussion about economic development and strategic planning in that regard, but if we don't know what our specific targets are. The biggest complaint I get in my district, and I think it's common throughout the city of Los Angeles, in fact, it's a problem throughout California, is that small businesses, micro businesses, which are the largest producer of jobs in the state of California, can't get financing. The projects that you point to may be spectacular, but I don't know that they cut to the fundamental problems that we're experiencing as a society in our economic side. It doesn't. It hardly touches. It does mention, small business, but the Chamber of Commerce represents downtown. They don't represent the small businesses in my district. Those are the ones. I don't see a specific strategy for micro enterprise, which is where the greatest job creation is going to exist, if it's going to exist.
Well, you're right. I mean, this report is not intended to be a strategy document. We recognize that there are all kinds of questions, the questions that you have and many others that need to be addressed. The difficulty is figuring out how to address those specific questions, identifying what they are and how to address them is really driven to a great deal about the structure that we set in place and how we go about answering those. There does need to be a small business focus, microloans, all of that stuff. So this is not intended to be a strategy document. What we're asking for here is authority to move forward in a structure so that we can develop the strategies and bring them back to you.
It's more musical chairs. I mean, let me say that the other large complaint I get from business is that our internal agencies, building and safety, transportation, housing, planning, are not coordinated sufficiently. And even if you take one department like building and safety, you'll get 3 different opinions from 3 different inspectors going out to visit a site. That drives people crazy, and it costs them a ton of money, and we don't benefit a whole lot from that either. So I see nothing in this plan that addresses that problem.
Councilman, I think our report actually is reflective of some of the frustration that you're trying to say, believe it or not. It comes from
I did feel some of that.
Yeah, it comes from the perspective, from the first thing is that there's an opportunity with the dissolution of the CRA. Before, if you were not in the CRA area, the number of resources that you had or the kind of economic opportunity activities were very, very limited, both in terms of actual resources and attention and strategy. And so with the dissolution of the CRA, now we're not tied by geographical lines. We now could propose something that's much broader. The second thing is that we could then start going into areas that we may have not been as aggressive on, which is, as you pointed out, the majority of the economy is driven by smaller businesses. It's not driven by the AEGs. It's driven by, the medium to small businesses that are developing every single day throughout the city. And this new entity could help us figure out how do we harness that? How do we take advantage of the fact that Los Angeles is a place where people want to start their business? What are the problems that we create to allow them to start and to maintain? And then as it relates to the lack of coordination, the ineffective or the challenges that we provide internally, that's why we point out that creating a nonprofit isn't the entire answer. That may help us in terms of establishing a strategy and goals, maybe identifying better ways to utilize our own assets. But ultimately, we need to fix ourselves too. There's a piece of that where we have to look internally and figure out how to better coordinate our own activities, streamline our processes, bring it together under one shop, and that's why we put it out into different pieces.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but I'll close with this, and that is that I'm not grasping clearly what the nonprofit is adding to the equation. As long as we recognize that the real fix is internal, or at least one of the primary fixes, our primary objective should be to fix the internal coordination problems that we have, the lack of consistency that we have, the online decisions that are blocking businesses from opening in February and forcing them to open in July after they're almost bankrupt. Those kinds of decisions are what's killing small business in our community. And when I say small, I mean small. I'm not talking about 200 employees. I'm talking about 10 employees, 20 employees. They have the greatest impact on job creation, and we don't ever seem to focus on it in our strategic plans. Some of our economic development partners in the nonprofit sector do that, but we don't seem to focus on it as a business entity. And in fact, some of our nonprofit economic development partners complain about our internal lack of coordination, and it's blocking their ability to get additional financing from traditional banks for somebody that's applying for an expansion of their business loan. Those are the kinds of frustrations. So that's on the internal side. Without seeing that, I'm not clear that we're on a path to correction rather than, as I said, just plain musical chairs here. On the nonprofit side, I think we need to hone in on exactly what the objectives are. Are we trying to create a CRA entity? Are we trying to create a financing entity? Are we trying to create an entity that has some kind of authority over our internal mechanisms to be able to override those decisions or move the process along, or an appellate body? What exactly is this nonprofit going to do except be a bunch of talking heads complaining about how the city does business, which is what I see it going down the path, because there's no clear goals. What are the objectives? Are you going to create 5,000 new jobs in the first year? I mean, what are we trying to accomplish? And are we going to target the small business sector, the large business, or are we just going to shotgun it? And I'm not getting, look, I've been around here a lot of years, and I've seen a lot of economic development projects, philosophies, strategies fall by the wayside. And I'm saying I don't see a whole lot of new stuff here. It's just, like I said, moving the boxes around. Anyway, I'm not saying this. I'm not saying this because I don't want to see this succeed. I'm saying this because I see these as some of the major challenges to making this successful.
If it were easy, everybody'd be doing it. Of the 7 recommendations in the CAO-CLA, of the CAO-CLA recommendations, I'd like to move 2 of them relative to recommendation number 7, that the council set aside funds in the fiscal year 12-13 proposed budget from the proceeds of the city's share of additional property tax payments due to the elimination of the former CRA, in order to fund a consultant and staffing and program for the new citywide economic development model. Also relative to recommendation number 2, direct the CAO and the CLA or designees within 90 days to secure a consultant in the development of the components and interactions of this new department or entity and the nonprofit entity, including the development of the necessary roles, responsibilities, and tools that are required to implement the city's economic development goals, and the consultant to provide a report to the CAO-CLA for submittal to the mayor and the city council HCED committee on the new economic development entity, including but not limited to the outline contained in the report. In addition to that, I'd also like to add that the CLA and the CAO come back in 45 days with a proposed structure for a not-for-profit entity, so that if possible, we can start moving forward with an economic development nonprofit entity if we choose to do so, that the city may be able to start to form that in the interim while we are hiring and awaiting the report of the consultant. Okay. So with that, that's what I move. Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, that's approved. Thank you very much. Next, we go to item number 7, the last item on our agenda.
Item number 7 was continued from the meeting on April 18th, a CLA and CAO report pursuant to council action of January 25th relative to a transition plan for the management of the housing assets, functions, and responsibilities of the former CRA.
Okay. Housing Department? Okay. Let's go to public comment first. Is there anybody here for public comment? We are on item number 7. I do not see any public comment cards before me on item number 7. Okay, anybody here for item number 7 on public comment? Seeing none, public comment on item number 7 is now closed. With that, I'd like to ask the CLA and CAO, and I also have questions for Housing Department as well. Can you present the report, please?
Sure. Good morning. Michael Keck, CLA's office, here with Anne-Marie Sauer, CAO, and Freshmore Cervantes with LEHD. So on January 25th, Council adopted a resolution to retain the housing functions and assets of the former CRA-LA. In that instruction, there was also an instruction for LEHD with the assistance of CAO and CLA to report back to the mayor and council with a transition plan, and which addresses short-term and long-term management of the housing assets and the functions of the former CRA-LA. In response, our offices got a report in March from LEHD with a proposed transition plan which addressed the topics of project management for development pipeline, portfolio management, occupancy compliance, accounting, systems, and legal. LEHD proposes a 2-phase plan. First phase being focusing on transition, and phase number 2 focusing on the implementation of their program. And Anne-Marie is going to talk about the resources.
In terms of the resources, the Housing Department requested the addition of 12 new positions to address the anticipated workload as part of phase 1 of the transition. However, at the time we were preparing the report, we didn't have the information soon enough to incorporate, so we will be reporting back on the overall piece. At this point, or the overall request, at this point we do support the department filling 3 existing positions, so we are working with them on that. They've submitted 1 request for consideration by managed hiring, which we're reviewing and have asked for additional information. The other big issue with resources is obviously the funding, and there was the anticipation that the former CRA's low and moderate income housing funds and loan portfolio revenue could be used for these positions. At this point, the issue of transferring the funds to the city has not been resolved with the designated local authority, so we're still working that out. In the event the funds don't materialize in the current fiscal year, the CAO will make the necessary recommendations in the year-end financial status report relative to the positions that we support filling at this point. There's also the issue of the employees, and as we previously reported in January, that based on the advice of the city attorney, the language in the CRA's MOU does not require that any employees be included when a function is transferred from the CRA. So the city is free to employ or not employ CRA-LA employees, but that freedom is constrained by the city's charter, administrative code, and labor contracts. And then we also note that the union representation, where applicable, would be covered under the city's existing bargaining units.
And there's a number of state bills that have been introduced that addresses specifically the housing functions and housing assets.
The bills don't address, they propose to address.
They propose to address, sorry. And you know, they would either result in amendments to AB 26 would modify certain languages associated with the housing assets and functions. Some bills would also provide actual assets that the housing department would be able to utilize to carry out those functions.
Okay. And as of right now, the Department of Finance has basically thrown us for a loop because they're claiming that if somebody wants to take over the housing assets that were formerly CRA housing assets, that the commensurate funds aren't going to follow. The Department of Finance opines that the state of California will keep those funds.
They would revert to the taxing entity, and then the city would receive approximately 30% of that. So as an example, the the loan portfolio with housing monies, it looks to be about $5.4 million annually, and that would equate to approximately $1.7 million that would come back to the city. But again, that would come back through the general coffers, not necessarily to be retained by the city of Los Angeles.
Even if it were 1.7 million, do you think that would be adequate funds to continue to follow through with the responsibilities of that housing stock?
It would fall short. And if I may, the initial report that the Housing Department transmitted was immediately following the decision of the mayor and council to become the housing entity. And there were little known factors as to what was going to be transferred. So the initial request was for 12 positions and then come back at a later time with a more comprehensive report. But as this has progressed over a period of time and not having the assets transferred at this point, we've been able to discern what would be transferred and would not be transferred based on our legal reading and working closely with the former CRA staff along with the housing staff. So we actually have a two-phased approach that would be able to address the loan proceeds as well as the covenants and the projects that are currently in construction. There's approximately 60 projects that are in the pipeline, and to shepherd those projects through to completion, that would take approximately 24 to 36 months. So there would be two tranches of staffing. One would be short-term, 24 to 36 months to shepherd those projects through to fruition, and a longer-term staffing plan that would be there in perpetuity for the purposes of loan monitoring and covenants. To answer your question on the short term, we estimate with the admin startup cost, leasing, it would probably take approximately $4 million annually, and that's just a rough estimate right now over the first 3 years, and then thereafter would be approximately $2 million. So either way, the $1.7 million, which would be the 30% of the loan proceeds, would fall short. But I think what's really important, Councilman, is that with the transfer of the assets and the responsibilities, we've got approximately 23,000 affordable units that have been secured by the former CRA that we need as a city, we believe, to ensure that we protect those assets, protect the affordable housing. Without the means by which to have the loan proceeds to be able to enforce the covenants, it becomes very difficult for any entity to be able to enforce them. So the loans have to be tied to the covenants and vice versa in order for any city or county to be able to enforce those covenants. But if we, as an example, decided not to accept those the responsibilities, those covenants would be in danger. So I think that in light of the fact that we have such limited resources coming in from a home entitlement, the elimination of the former CRA and $50 million a year going into affordable housing, we certainly have to protect, at the very least, the covenants that have been generated to date. Okay. It was a long answer to a very short question.
Well, what, if the Department of Finance opinion stands and they follow through with that, is that enough money for us to manage these, what, 23,000?
23,000 affordable units.
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
It is.
That probably dwarfs the entire affordable housing stock of any other city in the state. Just that 23,000 alone.
It's one of the largest. I believe San Jose is right up there, and it would essentially double the housing department's portfolio. The housing department sent a letter to the Department of Finance and copied the governor requesting that the Department of Finance change their position on the loan proceeds. We have yet to hear back from them.
So they didn't change their...
As of yet, no. There was a lot of pressure being applied up and down the state of California from cities as well as housing advocate groups petitioning the governor and the Department of Finance because from all accounts, there is no legal basis for that position that the Department of Finance has taken.
The legal basis is because we think we can. Because they're the state.
Possession.
I'm trying to figure out to what extent we are accurate when trying to figure out what the state is going to do next. It doesn't seem we have had a good track record in the last year in trying to anticipate what the state is going to do and the ramifications of what they've done. You said that you came in with a recommendation for 12 positions, but now you're changing that to 3 because you're not?
No, that's what's initially approved right now by the CAO and CLA. While we're waiting to determine with the transition, the larger goal would be approximately 24. Part of those would end up being...
what was the 12?
The 12 was initially back in January, early February, when we anticipated receiving the assets immediately.
Okay, that's my point.
That's
when you anticipated.
Correct.
Okay, we have not been very good at anticipating. And it's my concern as we move forward, as policy makers, I'm trying to assess how much to rely on your anticipations. Because, and not you personally, obviously, but this has been a horrible situation for everybody, but we have to make decisions that if we make the wrong assumptions, could be very costly as we move forward. And we haven't, and as I said, we haven't had a good track record of trying to figure this out. Our legal assumptions have not panned out either, or at least we're certainly being challenged at every turn on our legal positions. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I don't know how we can make decisions. We've got to manage this portfolio. By the way, can you describe when you say manage 23,000 units, can you describe what exactly you're talking about? Are we the managers of these units?
That is correct.
Do they pay us rent?
They do. What had happened is the CRA entered into agreements with developers to construct affordable units. And the loans are typically 30 years, and the covenants go upwards. The affordability covenants go up to 55 years. And the CRA and now the City of LA, just like with the LAHD's portfolio, would do the same, and that is to monitor the covenants on an annual basis.
So we're being paid by the developers or by the
developers
tenants?
are repaying their loan.
Okay,
Now,
so we're not. It's not like a tenant is sending the City of LA.
No, and
we're getting loans repaid by the developers that we lent money to.
But I must make something clear, though. The loan portfolio does not generate a significant amount of revenue because what is paid to the city would be based on net of any expenditures of the operations of the development. So very little money comes in on an annual basis, and that's.
But it was also based on the benefit of creating affordable housing.
That is correct.
So
I mean that's
you can't can't place a cash value on that, but. So the problem is that as these indebted this indebtedness was created on the basis of providing future tax increment dollars to the city. And that's why the state is saying those future tax increment dollars are now subject to the state reclaiming.
Well, the tax increment
How can
dollars...
they, I'm just wondering, how can they do that?
Well,
It's just, as you said, just because they can, but...
Right.
But how can they, I mean, if we've set up a contract with these entities to pay back a loan based on future tax increment, how can the state say that they can take it?
Well, that's the $64 question, Councilman. Initially, the City of Los Angeles, as well as the other 399 redevelopment agencies, when looking to make the determination whether they're going to be a successor agency, all received the same information from the Department of Finance, was that, as clearly defined early on by the Department of Finance, that a housing asset would include the loan portfolio as well as the loan proceeds. So that's the basis for decisions that every city and county made in the state of California. It's not till recently that they made that decision. So they're narrowly defining their definition of what a housing asset to benefit the state of California, and not necessarily the housing entities that now have taken on the responsibility of enforcing the covenants, which is, and without those loans, it becomes near impossible. So from a legal basis, we obviously disagree. The city
So when you
has
talk
not
about the
funded a
$2
legal
million
basis.
that you need to manage this going forward, what is that paying for?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
What is that, the 1.7, the $2 million, you said $4 million in the next couple of years, $2 million thereafter. What is that paying for?
That is paying for staff and consultants to monitor the covenants as well as manage the loan portfolio. There were residual
How does
receipts
that-
loans.
How does that compare to other jurisdictions that have similar responsibilities?
It would be very comparable because of the size of the loan portfolio. And what you have to remember, Councilman, the majority of the loans that we're referring to are residual receipts loans. So it requires an analysis of each of the project's annual report as it's sent in to determine if there's any cash flow that could be cut off the top in order to service the loan debt.
Is there no economies of scale when you go from your portfolio to double?
There are economies of scale, and that has been factored into our request. We're not looking for wholesale operations. If it was standalone, our resource request on a long-term basis are taking into consideration economies of scale for the existing infrastructure that we currently have at the Housing Department.
When do we expect to have clarity? Is there like a legal decision, a bill that, what is there a date when we will see clarity?
To clarify as best that I can at this point, the designated local authority, the three-member board that was appointed by the governor, initially responded to the department's request for transfer of assets back in end of January, was told that the designated local authority would make that decision as to when to transfer the housing assets. The DLA now is deferring to the 7-member oversight board that's been created. And for each successor housing entity or successor, whether it be the tax increment side or the housing side, there is a 7-member oversight board. That board, as a matter of fact, is meeting for the first time this morning as we're speaking. And subsequent actions, we are hoping that this oversight board will make that transfer, but there's no guarantee at this point because right now there's some legal questions as to where we are and trying to get to the Department of Finance to change its opinion as to what the housing asset is. What the Housing Department has put forward, at least on a tentative basis, and we're appreciative of the 3 positions that have been authorized at this point or that are being recommended for approval, would be a transition that would take place July 1st, so that during the months of June and July, during the month of June, we would actually start hiring up so that come July 1st we would transition this portfolio
That's
over.
assuming we take on that responsibility.
Well, the city council and the mayor have already made that decision. It's now a matter of, if there's discussion to potentially reverse that decision. I wouldn't recommend that as a houser, but that's
I'm
a
not
possibility.
suggesting that. But so the assets have not moved over yet.
Nothing has been transferred
So
yet.
we are not collecting the payments for
That
the
is
debt.
correct.
they are getting that. What did you call it?
The residual receipts loans?
Yeah, but the oversight, not the oversight board, but the other.
The designated local authority?
The DLA is receiving that money?
Well, the former CRA slash DLA.
Who's managing that portfolio now?
That is the former CRA staff and the designated local authority that are currently accepting.
As they're winding down?
There's
they're maintaining the staff to do that.
As they're winding down, their staff is shrinking, and come July 1st, as I understand, they're going to go to a staff to maybe between 40 and 50 staff members. The winding down is primarily on the 60 projects that are in construction now, or soon to go in construction.
Is the 1.7 enough for the operation that they have in place managing it?
No.
Okay.
Yes, hi, Helmi Hisrick. I'd like to add a couple of things to what's been said. In the process of transferring the assets, there is nothing contained in the legislation that requires the DLA to act or that requires the oversight board to act to transfer housing assets. So the CRA's position, which has been informed by the Department of Finance, is actually not supported by the legislation. And we have sent that information to the Department of Finance, and we've told that information to the designated local authority and the CRA. So we've been at a bit of a crossroads because the CRA staff is acting in one direction and LAHD staff is acting in another direction. However, the definition of what is getting transferred has not really been an issue until the Department of Finance opined. We had been having extremely good discussions with the CRA about what was getting transferred since January. We've been sitting down with them every other week and just going through the pipeline of projects, the loans in question, and the covenants. So we had very clear agreement on what was coming over. And then at the end of March, the Department of Finance issued an FAQ that derailed the conversation. And so we're struggling. They have written a report to the DLA board that acknowledges that the Department of Finance has told them something and that the city of Los Angeles is not in agreement. There is widespread disagreement with the Department of Finance's opinion across the state, and the three approaches to fixing it are either, one, get the Department of Finance to change their FAQ, which is in fact wrong. Two is to fix it legislatively through either Senate Bill 654 or Assembly Bill 1585, or three, to do it through the court system. And at this point, we're hopeful that the Department of Finance will change their opinion. What the opinion is that's factually wrong is that they've said that assets do not include the revenues to the loans, which if you look at any balance sheet and any review of what an asset is, it's cash and cash equivalents, and there's been it's a completely erroneous opinion. So that's where we are today, and our current hope is that the DOF will change their FAQ, their frequently asked questions, which we're hearing rumblings that will happen, but we have not seen it.
And Councilmember, we share the frustration.
Excuse me, in this new structure, at the end of the day, the Department of Finance can override the lower authorities at the end of the day.
Possibly, although I'm not sure. It's not contained. The Department of Finance is given sort of the role to define the ABX 26. However, what they've opined is inconsistent with ABX 26.
Aside from that, what I'm saying is these local authorities are being formed, and they're having their first meeting as we speak, et cetera. All of those authorities throughout the state can still be overridden. When they make a decision, they can still be overridden by the Department of Finance.
Correct.
But that's my point. The Department of Finance still holds all the marbles at the end of the day.
Right
They
now.
still determine what is or isn't going to happen at the end of the day.
Right.
And this is a very fluid situation. We recognize that, which is why we're requesting a report back in 30 days when we do have more information and we can present council and your committee with more valid information.
If I may add, the importance of the loan portfolio, if we do not control the revenues, we simply do not control the loans. And loans are fundamental to the refinancing of all this affordable housing. In order for us to maintain and preserve this housing over time, we have to have the ability to refinance those projects. And without that ability, we have no real ability to do that.
But unfortunately, the Department of Finance doesn't need to speak to that when they decide what they want to do with the proceeds. Correct?
It's pretty clear to me they don't even know what it means to have these loans, yeah.
You and I are on the same page. My point is, they don't seem to understand the responsibilities that come with it. They're just looking at the dollars.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
That is right.
Okay. All right. So with that, the committee will move to approve the CAO's report on this
Mr.
item.
Chair, do you mind one of this?
Oh,
okay.
that's perfect. So the committee will move to approve the CAO's report on this item. Okay. All right, that's approved. And then also on item number 1.
Thank you.
If the committee can concur as a full committee, item number 1. Okay.
As amended, yes.
Okay, as amended, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have council next. Oh, general public comment. Is there anybody here for general public comment? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. This committee is now adjourned.
I think you might want to.